Thank you everyone for joining. We will get started here in a few minutes just to allow everyone some time to join. Please note we will be taking a few questions via chat and answering them at the end of the presentation. We'll get started here in a few minutes. Thank you everyone for joining. We will get started here in just a few minutes to allow a few more people to join. Please note we will be taking a few questions via chat and answering them at the end of the presentation. We will get started here in just another minute.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining. My name is Brian DiPaolo and I'm the CTO at Accudata Systems. I've been with Accudata over 18 years and during that time I've worked as a cybersecurity consultant as well as managed teams of consultants and solution architects to help assess and build cybersecurity programs. In my current role, I'm focused on working with all our practices to bring the most relevant solutions to our customers.
Yes, and thank you for joining. My name is Mark Holdsworth. I am the Managed Services Practice Manager here at Accudata. I've been with Accudata for 8 years and with our Managed Services group for 6 years, both in operations as well as solution architecture roles.
So before we get started, I wanted to highlight who we are. So Accudata is a 37-year-old consulting firm, and we have a large portfolio of services and solutions, including cloud, managed services, and cybersecurity. We have roughly about 90 full-time consultants, but ultimately been around for a long time just because we partner with our customers, resulting in a 92% client retention rate, which we're very proud of over the last five years. But today is a story of how we've helped one of those clients who was severely impacted by an attack. I would say this is a more extreme case because the business was significantly lacking core controls, but it really highlights how every business really needs to meet a baseline of controls to ensure the continuity of the business, to basically keep the business functioning. So as we review today, I will be co-presenting with Mark. So at this time, I'll hand it off to him.
All right, thank you, Brian. Now onto our case study. A little background on this customer. So this customer is a little unique where they have two very distinct environments. The first is their business critical portion, which is their e-commerce environment. Now this is a hybrid environment with assets on premises, in a co-located data center, and in a public cloud. Their customers, so their end customers, access this environment directly almost 24/7. And any interruptions to this environment will result in a direct loss of revenue, not to mention customer reputation. The second is their corporate environment. Now this is a little more traditional environment, primarily based of assets on premises and in a co-located data center. And these assets consist of file, print, email, AD infrastructure. They have a Cisco UC call center, and all company employees have laptops and workstations registered to Active Directory here as well. So this customer reached out to Accudata for assistance managing their e-commerce environment. Now the use case for this customer was they have a very lean IT, which I asked recently, is there any non-lean IT shops out there nowadays? But they have extended business hour requirements, support requirements. So these are more than just your standard 8x5x5. Now again, to reiterate, this environment is business critical. The customer can track every minute this environment is down, there's a direct loss in revenue. So we worked out a support plan where Accudata would manage the e-commerce side of the house, while their internal IT group retained all management of their corporate environment. So one day, the customer CEO reached directly out to our support team to see if we could help them investigate an issue they were seeing. Now, a number of their customers reported they had received emails spoofed from the customer's Exchange server. Now, the customer's IT team identified an original issue, and they were actively restoring their Exchange server in hopes of resolving this issue. Our managed services team reached out to the customer's IT team to help finish restoring the Exchange server and also see where else we could help them out. We worked to identify an employee laptop that was responsible for relaying messages off of the server, and our managed services technical lead took the laptop offline. We scanned it. We identified TrickBot as the culprit. Once we had the laptop back in our office, we scanned it, we identified it. We then were able to clean the laptop and get it returned to the customer. And at this point, all appeared right in the world. However, the very next week, we received a call from the customer's internal IT team. They were reporting to see additional issues that appeared to be very similar in nature to the previous incident that started the week prior. Now, our technical lead helped identify 3 additional workstations that were infected with TrickBot, including the original system that we had just returned to them. At this point, we engaged the customer's executive team again. We had no visibility into their environment, which resulted in both our team and the customer's internal IT team being very reactive to each situation as it came up. In order to get in front of this, we needed to be more proactive. So we requested permission to deploy our remote monitoring and management suite to help shed some light on the environment. Now, once we got everything approved, our NOC administrator and our technical lead worked with the internal IT team to gather the required credentials and IP addresses, and we began deployment. And boy, did we gain visibility. Our remote monitoring and management suite began scanning and reporting back a large number of issues. It identified TrickBot on over 30-plus systems throughout the environment. We found a number of rogue devices on the network as well. So we quickly escalated to the executive team, and they asked if we could take over management and start remediating immediately. Our managed services team sat down and worked very closely with our customer's internal IT team. We identified all the rogue devices that were showing up in our scans. Our team also began putting together an assessment of the state of the environment so that we could help us know exactly what we were dealing with and we could start prioritizing the issues. As a part of our management suite, we used WebRoot to detect and quarantine the systems with TrickBot, and we began the manual removal process of the malware. And we had most of the machines cleaned when we started getting alerted that previously cleaned systems were now being reinfected. Not only were they being reinfected by TrickBot, we were seeing that coming back, but it was coming back much faster than we could clean using traditional tools. At this point, our technical lead needed help.
So thank you, Mark. So at this point, we're roughly, let's say 10 days have passed since the malware was uncovered in the email environment. But let's summarize that. So while the initial email event was impactful to the flow of email that day, the first week that passed was relatively calm. Once additional instances of the malware were uncovered, things escalated quickly. So remember, we've not been managing this environment, and now we're, let's say, a week in, and the initial malware discovery really uncovered some key areas. So the first one being patching. Many of the systems have not been patched in over 3 years, and there was no patch management solution. For those of you who've tried to patch a system that is that far behind, it's very laborious with many manual steps and reboots. The malware was constantly reinfecting, as Mark mentioned. So while WebRoot is now detecting malware, there were new unprotected systems being discovered. Some systems had persistent rootkits, so they would return after a reboot. And then we've started finding malware variants that were propagating and not being detected by antivirus. And to make it worse, users were using infected USBs that were putting malware right back on the systems we had just cleaned. With all this reinfection, as the malware is trying to propagate through email, the Exchange server is seeing spikes of the email queue of over 10,000 emails. And then lastly, there's no command and control detection at the perimeter. Again, we have no visibility of what's coming in or out. So while the business was impacted some over the first week, business operations now is almost taken completely offline. So let's kind of review that, right? So daily operations of the business has halted and flowed across all departments. Malware is impacting so widespread that people are having to give up their workstations to troubleshoot, reimage, allow cleaning. I mean, basically there is constant interruption. Email flow is basically halted, so correspondence is not occurring. They're just normal business correspondence. The revenue-generating e-commerce application, it is still online, but the application teams cannot manage it. So think of a NASA control center that's empty, but the space shuttle is still flying. This is the problem they're dealing with. On top of all that, you've got the accounting team, who is also one of the departments directly impacted. No new invoices are going out. The CEO reported back to us that revenue was at 50% of normal for that point in the month. The business was truly at risk. So what do we do now? With the business severely impacted or really crippled at this point, escalation from our MSP team, it's become clear that we need to change our approach. The client did not have the proper infrastructure of security controls and personnel to defend themselves. So at this point, Accudata recommends to the client, we need to assemble a new response team. The team is consisting of a couple different resources. So we have a project manager, and the project manager is going to manage the team and help orchestrate across all the members. We brought in a risk and compliance specialist on our cybersecurity team. This person was there to validate the threat and determine the risk, but really more through a security-focused discovery than we've done up until this point. Then we had a security technology consultant. So this person was a security architecture subject matter expert, and this person was building the defense strategy. And then lastly, we brought in a cloud applications consultant. And this person was, while cloud is really not part of this discussion or this customer's environment, this person was a Microsoft subject matter expert who was going to review Active Directory as well as access and really assist with the remediation. Think about like patching, configuration, and integration needs. So we were able to assemble this team within hours and started having formal check-ins within every few hours. We leveraged a team space to collaborate so every team member was aware of the state and the attack in real time, as well as what each other was doing. So one of the first things we did was do some vulnerability scanning of the environment. We utilized Tenable Nessus, and part of what our goal was is to validate the system inventory, identify exposed services, think about risky ports. We were looking for systems with vulnerabilities as well as misconfiguration. We needed to inventory what accounts were out there, especially privileged accounts, and ultimately fingerprint systems that we needed to identify additional malware infections. The discovery effort uncovered the following. So on the internet side of things, so we had vulnerable internet-facing systems. So these were systems that were exploitable or could have already been compromised. We found additional systems that were not uncovered by our remote management tool. Ultimately, there was training systems the customer did not make us aware of, and we found those through this process. We validated patching issues. Many systems were vulnerable to common patching and configuration issues, which we kind of suspected already, but it just validated it further. We found a default vendor settings, and just in general, we found lack of proper system hardening. But this is where things get interesting. The biggest issue we found was an instance of remote control software. So we first accessed that system with the remote control software, and we verified that it wasn't authorized working with the client. At this point, it was removed. So then we started doing some more active scans for that software and the ports it uses in the environment, and we found more. Even more concerning is as we ran these scans, it appeared new installations were appearing. So we're scanning systems, and we're going back and scanning again, and then ultimately what we're doing is finding that installation just occurred. So we accessed one of those systems where it was freshly installed. In reviewing the system and application logs, we could see that there was actually an attacker live on that system, meaning they were making administrative user changes, application configuration changes. At this point, this is no longer a simple malware event, but an active attacker in the environment. So where are we at now? So we have full visibility to the environment, so things like system inventory, patching status, user accounts. We're detecting and cleaning the systems infected with malware and rootkits really as best we can, although things continue to spread. However, we have an active attacker in the environment, and he still has control. But why is this? So I think one of the key things to point out is we have, again, poor visibility at the perimeter. In addition to that, we have malware moving laterally in the environment. And remember, the customer has no incident response process, so we're really building this on the fly. And this all along, this is while the production environment is still functioning with little to no operations management while we deal with all this. So now we realize we've got to get much more aggressive in our approach. So we really attacked we targeted the attacker on the following fronts. So first, the perimeter. This is really where we're hurting pretty badly right now. We blocked all known ports associated with TrickBot to help slow things down. This firewall, though, however, was a layer 3 end-of-life firewall with really limited logging. So really what we decided to do is we pulled a Cisco next-gen firewall from our inventory and deployed it with the existing firewall. And what I mean by that is we deployed it without routing at layer 7 inspection. So ultimately, what we didn't want to do is have to pull their production firewall out, put ours in, migrate rules. We just didn't have time for that. So by allowing us to put it in line and still inspect the traffic, we were able to very quickly add some of those next-gen firewall features. And those are things like intrusion prevention, anti-malware prevention, geolocation, which allows you to understand where the attacks are coming from and the ability to block them. Immediately, we started blocking traffic associated with some of the malware. Next, we looked at access. So we went through, and of all the accounts that we are aware of, especially focused on privileged account, we reset passwords on all those accounts, really trying to at least slow down, if not stop the attacker that way. Command and control. So we deployed a product called Cisco Umbrella, which leverages DNS to identify and block traffic associated with malicious destinations and malicious hosts. So much of malware today uses command and control protected by encryption. We've seen an evolution where in the past that may just go out on HTTP, and today it's using things like TLS and SSL. So now it's actually encrypting the malware as it beacons back home. Well, the firewall still is not configured in a way where we can inspect that traffic. So how we overcame that was leveraging Umbrella. So now what happens is when those DNS requests are made to connect back out to those malicious sites or those command and control sites, we actually identify that and block those sites. So as soon as we see those, we would flag those systems that were making those attempts, take them offline, and clean those systems. So lastly, we looked at lateral movement. At this point, the perimeter, we're getting fairly strong visibility and are getting things under control at the perimeter, but there's still things in the network. So we deployed Cisco AMP for endpoints. And what we did is this is a more advanced malware solution, and we didn't have to deploy it to all endpoints. We just scattered it throughout the environment. And what I mean by that is as the malware starts to scan and try to find other systems to connect to, as long as we have some of those endpoints or some of those agents in the environment, it starts picking those things up. And very quickly, the same as what we saw when we deployed the firewalls, when we deployed Cisco Umbrella, as we started seeing those systems make connections, we would flag them, take them offline, and clean them. So really, at this point, we have crippled the attacker. There's no ability to enter or exit the environment. The remaining malware we believe has been remediated or removed and we confirmed this further. As you go forward a few days, we saw a few other instances pop up that came through, but we were able to identify those and clean those as well. The user accounts that were compromised were disabled or reset, so the attacker did not have a path back, and the attacker did not have a path back in to try and modify those accounts at this point, so now those accounts are protected. The attacker really had no longer any control and really couldn't get into the environment. So he's basically been removed from the environment. However, at this point, really the damage was done. Almost 2 weeks of lost productivity. Cash flow was impacted just based on the lack of invoices processed. And you're dealing with customer satisfaction issues due to slow customer response. I mean, basically agents couldn't work to be able to respond to customer needs during this time, even though the e-commerce environment was online. And why was the attacker in the environment? While we'll never really know, a forensics investigation was performed after our response, and the key finding you might find this surprising, but it was Bitcoin mining. So this attacker had been in the environment for months doing Bitcoin mining, and what was believed is the attacker was introducing QuickBot, because QuickBot can often be leveraged to with Bitcoin attacks to be able to steal Bitcoin wallets. So what they were doing is actually, after they were done using this environment, they were using it as a jump point to be able to jump out to other organizations. I think the key thing I want to point out is at the end of the day, the attacker was in the environment for compute, only compute. This really highlights this type of attack could occur in any environment. So really, what did we learn? Let me hand this back to Mark to give his MSP perspective.
So thank you, Brian. So as we started putting together a list of gaps and really analyzing the situation and from where we started to where we are today, you know, one of the gaps we noticed very first is no visibility into their environment. Now, I coach Little League Baseball, and one of the first things I communicate and demonstrate to young hitters is you can't hit what you can't see. And this customer had no way of seeing what was going on in their environment. And once we installed good monitoring and management suite, we started to see the ball, so to speak. We identified a large number of road devices, including the server that was acting as the command center for the bad actor. We identified illegal software, out-of-date software, and much, much more. The second big key thing we noticed is no antivirus management in the environment. So without proper identification and notification, the customer had no idea their environment was compromised for so long. Now, an antivirus application or suite would not have stopped everything here, but an initial AV alert that something was amiss may have helped prevent a lot of this. And not to mention, who is the first to know? You know, we always want to be the first to know something's going on, but the first sign for this customer was one of their end customers, which is never a good thing. Next, we had another extreme gap with patching. As Brian mentioned, our scans started reporting back, and we saw that systems had not been patched in over 3 years. Now, a recent study showed that 50% of data breaches were attributed to poor patch management. So even if one patch for an exploitable vulnerability is missing across numerous systems, it could propagate quickly. Now, governance is critical, and reporting and alerting on failed and available patches is crucial. The other thing we noticed, which was very key, is that the customer had a lot of end-of-life hardware, specifically workstations and laptops that led to poor productivity and employee downtime. When we were reviewing with the customer afterwards, and they talked through understanding the volume of systems that they had out of life and out of support, they understood that they spent a lot of time, you know, putting band-aids on these systems. You know, we also found a number of end-of-life network and server infrastructure devices as well. Now, end-of-life hardware oftentimes means end-of-life software or end-of-support software. Not to mention, most of the devices that were on the network were many revisions behind on software updates. So visibility and quantification of these gaps help the customer prioritize risk moving forward.
So thank you, Mark. Now I want to focus maybe on some more of those core security gaps. So as we mentioned before, where did this all start? It was really email. The perimeter email security system was really deprecated. The system was not monitored to ensure it was functioning properly. There was no outbound mail being scanned. Mail relay was not restricted, which we saw that was the key reasons for that spike in the email queue. And it hadn't been updated in over a year, so there was new functionality and components that could be leveraged or enabled, which were not in place. Perimeter, I talked quite a bit about the perimeter, but just again to highlight, this was a end-of-life layer 3 firewall, which had restricted capabilities and basically no logging. Again, we had no visibility of what was entering or exiting the environment, as well as the ability to control it. The thing you have to remember is our the attackers are getting more complicated. You require really those more advanced layer 7 type next-gen firewalls to be able to defend against it. So building on the perimeter, we had no visibility to destination as well. So in this case, we could not see the attacker really entering and exiting the building, and we also could not see that he was gathering more weapons across the street. And what I mean by that is basically, if we could see the malware and the attacker connecting to the known bad destinations, we could have been able to react much quicker. USB control. So while this doesn't seem like a major issue, it really caused problems for this customer. So the customer environment was lacking so many controls, USB became another key vector of attack. The reinfection rate was high due to lateral movement, but USB contributed to numerous reinfections and really slowed us down greatly in our ability to be effective. If we really had central visibility and control, we could have shut this down very quickly. So while this is not anywhere near a comprehensive list of key gaps, it's really it's ones that could be easily resolved. So without these controls, this points to the lack of security accountability. This organization really had no security functions. Even with their hundreds of users and a revenue-generating e-commerce application, no one was accountable for security of the environment. There was no CISO, there was no IT manager that had security responsibility, and really there was no executive backing to focus on security and mitigate risk. I guess the key point I'm trying to make is ultimately every organization needs visibility to their risk and someone who owns responding to those risks to verify if they're acceptable or not. So that was really critical of a miss in this case. So let's take a minute to summarize where we're at. So what did we really learn today? So how did we find the breach? So the organization did not have controls to detect this attacker. It was only when the customer escalated, as Mark had mentioned, the spoofed emails that caused the organization to look deeper. You never want to be in that situation where your customer is telling you there's a problem. You always want to detect that first. What was the business impact? So we're talking about close to 2 weeks of lost productivity. Their customers were frustrated. There was poor response to normal requests and service needs, and really in the end there was numerous customer credits we know that were issued really to deal with the customer satisfaction issues, right? So this further impacted the bottom line of this organization, having to respond to that even after having to deal with this first problem. Now they're providing these credits to their customers. And how did we get rid of this attacker? It was a defense in depth approach. So we had to get visibility to the systems. As Mark mentioned earlier, you can't secure what you don't know what you have. So that was really step one, is really to get that visibility. But then really just securing the systems and those basic controls. I mean, just having at least the basic controls, such as centrally managed antivirus, basic configuration hardening, stronger passwords, USB control. Those were all critical facets that were critical to get the attacker out, and really things that they need going forward. The perimeter, I'll mention it one more time. Again, this was we needed that more advanced control, a layer 7 control. And really, if you even think about when we introduced the Umbrella solution, that was critical as well, because malware today, the majority of malware uses encryption to have command and control connections. You're not going to be able to do that with even with a layer 7 firewall, because you can't crack open that encryption. You have to use a solution like that to be able to catch it when those DNS lookups are being made. And then again, finally, lateral movement. The center of the network it's always the GUI center, right? So Cisco AMP allowed us to really shut down the remaining malware that was kind of bouncing around system to system. So how do we keep this from happening again? So ultimately, what happened here is this organization is now on a journey. They put a security manager in place, so there is accountability now, and actually they worked with Accudata to build out a security roadmap. This roadmap is a prioritized plan of controls. The controls were directly aligned with the identified threats, things such as malware, ransomware. But it's not all about technology. People and process is critical. So I can guarantee you next time they will have an incident response plan to where they can respond. And really in the threats we're dealing with today, it's very likely there will be a next time. So you want to be prepared. And finally, as far as this plan goes, it aligns with the budget, because you have to right-size this to the organization. You know, a small and large organization don't necessarily can take the same approach, and they're going to use different controls. So in the end, this customer was able to accomplish this with Accudata's managed services and our ability to burst into our consulting team. But really my question to you is to look into your environment to verify you have the solutions and people to enable this type of defense as well. So really, at this time, we are going to take some questions that were asked from the audience. So I guess let me pull up our questions here, and we can get to the first one. So I guess we'll go to the first question. So I'll point this at Mark. So how was the e-commerce environment not affected?
Alrighty, so thanks, Brian. So the customer's e-commerce environment, this environment was previously segmented due to their PCI requirements. When we onboarded this environment through our managed services, our advisory services principal and our team went through a standard MSP roadmap process. During that process, we performed a number of health checks, as well as a security review, specifically because this is a PCI environment. And so what we did was we identified security control gaps that we needed to address. And so at this point, we've worked through just about all of those gaps. I think, going back to Brian's comment, we can't come in for some organizations. You do have a budget, you have a timeline. So our team, I feel our team did a very good job of identifying risk and priority, and this is something that we continue to address every quarter as we go through with this customer. So there's certain things that we've addressed in other initiatives, and there's things that are coming up as different processes change, different requirements change. But again, it was about having insight and a plan on this environment from the very beginning.
No, thanks for the clarity, Mark. Let's see here. The next question I've received, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. It says, was it determined how the attacker entered the environment, or was it ever determined how the attacker entered the environment? So based on all the data that we got in the end, the answer to that is no. So you got to remember, again, this environment had so few controls around visibility. It was just very difficult to really lay out a order of events that occurred. I think in terms of detective controls, when you think of things like intrusion detection, different types of logging solutions such as security information event management, these are the types of controls that you have to have in place to get some kind of forensic fingerprint of what happened in the environment, which we just didn't have. What was interesting, though, is through the investigation, there was a print server that it appeared to be kind of the main point where this attacker was kind of living in the environment and using a jump point within the environment. But it was interesting that it was a decommissioned print server, but it was still live in the environment. So that also highlighted another gap where the environment, in terms of controls, where systems that were no longer used were still live in the environment and really provided a landing spot for somebody like this to hide. So that's really a great place for them to hide, but not a good thing in your environment. So that was also a big challenge.
Yeah, and I can see, just the number of environments that I've managed throughout my career where there's a lot of times you look in an environment, and I would challenge everybody today, take a look at your VM list and see, are there any servers that we meant to decommission or we meant to turn down? Because a lot of times those systems may be pulled out of your patching process, they may be pulled out of that patching cycle, and now you have a machine that's behind in patching as you move forward.
Yeah, and Mark, since you mentioned patching, so we have another question that came in actually about patching. So the question says, how did the customer get back to current patching, right? Well, I guess we described how far behind they were, so I guess how did they deal with that?
All right, well, that is a great question. So we had a pretty big we had a pretty big mountain to climb with this customer. So the last thing we wanted to do was pull a weekend all-nighter or 3 nights and just blast patching out there. Again, we had systems that hadn't been patched in 3 years. A lot of the customer systems were patched at the time that they were deployed and then never touched. So we really had to help identify, a patching process where we go out and look at any test, dev, or QA environments that the customer had. They had it in spots. So for some of their applications, they had that. Some of them they did not. So where they had that, we were able to build out a ringed approach so we can identify, test, dev, QA, And then also when we got to those more production systems where we did not have a system to test on, we built out an A/B schedule. So, take an example, Active Directory. So we identified a primary Active Directory and a secondary Active Directory. If it was a SQL server, we did the same. So we were able to patch on, weekend, so we were able to patch, first, second, third weekend, and then fourth weekend, we're doing the final cycle of those patches. One thing we made sure we did was when we had an approved patch for each ring, no other patches are allowed to enter that ring until they've gone through the very outer ring. And so this allowed us to make sure that we controlled the updates that were going into the environment. From there, it was all about building out a schedule. We need to better understand the customer's work process, understand the customer's business processes. When can we take downtime? When can't we take downtime? So we built out a schedule, and we follow that schedule very strictly moving on. If there's any months we need to skip due to processes or end of month, end of quarter, we work through those.
So I'm going to, no, thank you, Mark. I'm going to jump to the next question. So somebody just submitted a question. How much would restricting outbound traffic to just the required ports, and they're listing like port 80, 443, 587 as examples, how much would that have helped? Because I guess they're dealing with a scenario where the outbound traffic is all today. So it's really just kind of summarizing. The question is asking how much would restricting outbound traffic really help? So I think the key thing to point out is, first off, you always want to restrict outbound traffic. We see too many environments where outbound traffic is a kind of an any rule or an any rule outbound because of all the outbound malicious traffic going to either sites you don't want them going to, or which also is combined with content filtering solutions. But ultimately, you want to control where your traffic is going as well as what's coming in. But the thing to remember is a lot of malware and malicious traffic is going out encrypted now. So they're using things like port 443 to go out using SSL. That's where you have to look at a solution like a Cisco Umbrella, where you've got some way to identify that traffic outbound, either looking at DNS or using some sort of SSL decryption type solution for that outbound traffic of your users, so you can inspect it before it gets encrypted. So that's really critical. So to really summarize, you definitely want to restrict it. The ports you restrict to are going to be definitely focused on your business needs. If you can restrict it to specific destinations and not just the ports, that's going to help. But you also need a way to crack into the encryption and not just allow port 443 outbound unrestricted, because that's going to hurt you. Let's see here. We've got a few other questions that have come in. I'm going to pass this one to Mark. So if their email was Office 365, would that have made a difference? So again, a SaaS-based email system.
Gotcha. So that's again a good question. I think not entirely. So it would still be possible to relay malware in this customer environment if they had not configured Exchange Online Protection or any of the other Microsoft or third-party online malware tools. We oftentimes, we need to make sure that as we shift workloads and processes from either, on-premises in our environment to a cloud location, we take the same security precautions and steps that we do when our data is on-premises. One of our consultants and solution architects that I talk to a lot, he says a lot, the cloud can be secure when you secure it. So I just think, we just need to take the same precautions, moving it from on-premises to the cloud, no matter what the application is, not just email, but every application that's moved around. We are still responsible for security of that data.
We have a few remaining questions, but actually I'm looking at these and they all kind of tie together some. So I'm gonna kind of combine my answer on this last one. So one of the questions was, because I'd mentioned that this was not a comprehensive list of controls, and this question was, what is a comprehensive list of controls? What should we be using beyond what we talked about today. Someone also asked about really the price of securing your network. So in terms of the revenue impacted after the security measures were implemented compared to the time before the attack. So really, I guess it sounds like he's looking for kind of an ROI on, how much money should you be spending to secure your network. So I think what I want to do is tie this all back to security planning. So, in this case, the customer did not, they were not looking at security as strategic, and so part of it is looking at, there's control frameworks out there. So let me highlight. So there's like the NIST cybersecurity framework. There's the ISO 27001. There's the CIS set of controls. These are all different, just industry standard list of controls to protect your environment. But the thing I would say you always want to bring this back to is right sizing it to your organization. So how do you do that? Really, it comes down to a risk assessment based approach. So what you're going to do is look at, hey, what are the real threats to your environment? And in this case, this one was pretty generic, right, in terms of malware, or you could look at something like ransomware, which those are all things that can affect your environment. But depending on your business, are you dealing with nation state threats? Do you have competitive threats? What are those things that really could impact your business? And based on those threats, you start to look at what are the controls in your environment that you have today to really understand, do those controls mitigate the risk? And where they don't, you start identifying those gaps. And based on those gaps, now you're starting to say, okay, how much does it cost me to remediate those gaps, and what are the different options? And that's where you really start looking at, is the risk acceptable or not? Because if the risk is not acceptable, then you're basically saying the cost associated with if something happened is more expensive than what I'm going to spend on this control. There's an ROI there. So to kind of answer both those questions, it's all about building a security plan, but that security plan has to be based on a risk-based approach that really evaluates the impact of the organization and the cost it's going to take to secure the organization. And I guess actually so I said there was several questions. One other question that is a little bit linked to this was really asking what the names of those Cisco products were that were reviewed, just as a set of controls. So just to clarify that for anybody who had a question, I did mention Cisco Umbrella, which is a DNS-based control. So it's using DNS to say once you do a lookup and say that I'm going to let's say a malicious destination, I can block or take action on that. And then we were also talking about Cisco AMP for endpoint, which stands for anti-malware protection. What that's doing is it is a endpoint protection that you can install on your endpoints, and then as attacks are moving laterally in your environment, again, you'd be able to block. So those are those additional controls for those who are asking about that. So really, I really appreciate everybody joining us today. If you're interested in learning more or performing a more detailed review of your own environment, Accudata is going to be offering a complimentary discussion with one of our cybersecurity solution architects, or we've heavily discounted our security technology review, which basically performs an inventory of your current state, and we'll really give you that initial path to mature your security posture if you are interested. So at the conclusion of this webinar, you will be provided a URL to access this presentation beyond today, as well as contact Accudata for any follow-ups. We really appreciate you joining, and have a great day.